Okay, you are live.
Okay. I'd like to call the Amity Regional Policy Committee meeting to order at 5:05 p.m. The first order of business is approval of our policy minutes from February 2nd. Any suggested changes or modifications to the minutes?
Not from here.
Nope.
Okay. I have a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion.
I can second that.
And then Lisa, just remember, because we're virtual, we have to do roll call for everything.
Okay, thank you for letting me know. Are we ready for roll call?
Yeah.
Mr. Young,
Yes.
Dr.
Ye-
Oladile,
Yes.
Ms. Schlenk,
Yes.
Ms. Schuster.
Miss Schuster, we didn't hear you for some reason.
Oh, really? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now you're good.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Perfect. Motion carries.
Great. Thank you. Public comment.
We didn't receive any requests.
All right. The fourth item on our agenda, discussion and possible action on policies to go forward. The first is policy 2151, recruitment and selection of administrative staff, page 4.
So again, this is sort of working off of the base policy that we had. We've now got lots of colors on it. But the red would have been, I think, the first version. The blue was kind of the second. And then what I did was go into CABE's model policy and kind of pulled the yellow piece, which is the one that sort of gives, is how they approach the board involvement in a recommendation of candidates. And that's kind of where I left off. I know Mr. Young sent us some thoughts on that, which I'm sure he's happy to share, but I just kind of wanted to explain sort of where it all came from and how I sort of put those pieces together.
Thanks, Doctor.
Thank you.
And I did, and I just again, it was more of a recitation, I suppose, of some of the thoughts that we had shared together as a board before. And there's perhaps just some categories. One, how many candidates, if any, do we want? Two, how, if I say deep, or how uh, low in the hiring process? Again, that sounds denigrating, but at what level does the board want to involve itself in the hiring process, from the superintendent to the, assistant to down to principal levels per se? And then one thought would be, what do we do in the meantime by way of interim acting? But I think before we even get into the weeds, and then I'll stop talking in just a second, one of the biggest, I think, things that we as a board or as a committee need to agree on to present to our board is, well, two things really. One, how many candidates, one is, if that's what we agree, and then how, to what level of administration does the board want to be directly involved and even authoritative in hiring?
So, as I recall, during our last, and I can't remember if it was our policy meeting or if we discussed this at the larger board meeting, but I think we had discussed administrators down to the building principals level, given that we're a smaller district, and having board members involved in the process. And I think we mentioned maybe either personnel committee or making it open to the broader board to join if they had time, but to have board members that were part of the process. My thought is that there's some advantage to having the same person, right? Because then there's continuity, and there's continuity. And I think that would be my preference, but I'll pause there. But I know those options were raised before, so.
And that is currently the structure of your current policy. It's at the director level and the building principal level.
My question would be, to what extent do we want the board member involved? I know there's a whole screening process, and so maybe there could be strategically certain times where I think somebody mentioned one or two people from the board would then be invited at that point. Not sure we have to be part of the whole process. It would just be sort of strategically, at phase, whatever that phase is, maybe a couple times throughout that process, one or two board members, perhaps from the personnel committee or not, be invited and kept up to date on that process. The next layer would be, and I think it's sort of spelled out here, is that finally, when it's narrowed down to that one person that the superintendent is recommending to the board, if the board at that point feels that we need to go back to the drawing board, that's also an option. So there's a lot of room there, I think, for the board to be involved if it is as such.
Would it make sense, or does this kind of cut out some of the discussion that we had to, if we as a committee first decide perhaps, do we only want one candidate, or do we want two or more, up to the discretion of the superintendent? Should we subcategorize these issues? And if we can get, committee consensus on one, then we move on to the next category. Does that maybe make sense?
That makes a lot of sense to me.
So I think
Yeah.
the first one then is exactly who you are part of the interview process for. And I heard Carol say principals and directors. That is sort of what we currently have right now. Is there any other thought on that?
What Christian sent was going down to the assistant principal level. Do we have
Actually, it was much further than that. It's going into the department chair level, which would be a teacher position, instructional coach level, also a teaching position. So it actually, what he sent goes much, much deeper into the layers.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I didn't mean to suggest it or propose it per se. It was just a topic of discussion I thought we should have.
Yeah.
This is the range. Me personally, I would think that anything below principal is going to be really, really onerous. And we could even discuss whether or not principal would be a good line to draw. But anyway, I just provided that more as just an exemplar and not necessarily as my own personal recommendation.
I'm
So-
agreeing with that. I'm sorry. I'm agreeing with that. I would definitely stop at principalship. And I could even lean toward not having that as part of it. But that's where my opinion is.
I
How
would
about you,
say-
Donna?
I would say definitely to the principal level. I think that the principal, because they run the building and in each middle school and in the high school. So I definitely agree that we should at least go to the principal level.
So by way of a draft that we ultimately will propose to our full board, at least for immediate purposes, we will contemplate having a draft that would go to the principal level.
I think we're all in agreement with that. So
And
down to the principal level.
And I think we have that. It's in the blue, it's in the third paragraph. Senior administrative staff includes all district level directors and school principals.
Perfect. Nice.
So I think the second piece then is when does involvement start? Does that start with screening? Does that start with, the first interview process? Like where are we starting with board involvement in the hiring process?
I would like to hear a recommendation from Jen on that because she knows that process so well. I don't really think that we should be part of this initial screening. But I'd like to hear more about that process and what she would recommend.
I would recommend not part of the screening. I think again, in terms of volume and how onerous that could be on the board. It's a lot to ask of a board member. In some cases, we're getting 40 to 50 applicants. The applications are 15 pages or more. And that's not including their resume, their letters of reference, their letter of interest, their transcripts. It's a lot. So I think that that's a big ask. I will typically have at minimum 3 rounds of interviews. So I don't see any reason why board members couldn't be part of any one of those. I mean, you can be on all of those rounds. They're pretty and sometimes there's more depending on who we have. So that would be my recommendation, is to not be in the screening process, but certainly participate in any of the rounds of interviews that we have.
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, to leave to the superintendent developing the criterion and then developing the pool from which interviews would then come.
Yeah, I agree with that. I am part of the search process for another board, and yeah, the screening applications is a lot. And but if we are beginning our involvement at the interviewing stage, and Jen, you said there are 3 rounds, generally 3 rounds of interviews.
Yeah, typically there's going to be 3 rounds. Yep.
When you excuse me, I just want clarification. When you say 3 rounds, you mean like 3 separate groups, or the same people going 3 rounds?
Usually, usually I do separate groups because well, a little bit of both. There's always usually, I would say, 2 to 3 people who serve on every single round of the interview process to provide continuity. But at the same time, and I think particularly like when I think about principals, when there's so much vested interest from students, from staff, from administrative colleagues, from me, we end up usually having different people serve on each interview committee. So that way we can get as many eyes on the candidate as possible. But at the same time, again, for continuity, there will usually be a handful of people who will go through every single layer of the interview.
Is it
So
like
after those 3, I'm just trying to understand it. After those 3 rounds, what's the next layer?
Then the next layer is usually an interview with me. I'm sort of the last one, and then I do the reference checks.
Okay.
So the one thing that I think we should do in terms of involvement is having the same board members. I think that would be critically important to have continuity in, like, which board members participated in those 3 rounds. I don't think it makes a lot of sense just to sort of have people hop in and out. So whoever can commit the time and, show up, and because there's more than one person, something comes up and you can't make it, that's fine. There's 2 of you, right? So.
And what, I don't know, I was going to put that out there again about, just for, sort of logical sense, I guess. I mean, would it make sense to have a couple of members from the policy committee? I mean, not policy, I'm sorry, personnel.
Yes, usually it makes sense for personnel, but again, like in the case if we're hiring like our finance, a new Miss Loomis, a director of finance, it may make sense to have members of the finance committee be involved. So I think it's going to depend on the position. I would typically say personnel committee for principals, probably personnel committee for directors, but maybe with some consideration for other committee members, depending on the position.
maybe we leave the 2 board members' participation in subcommittees kind of unspecified, and we just allow it to be 2 board members to be determined by the board and with the superintendent?
Okay, makes sense.
I agree with that.
Yep.
Yeah.
I do. Yep.
Depending on what area of expertise board member.
Right.
That can just be assumed, like,
Well, it can
whoever
be like, you might want to have one of our board members who has a finance background, who will most likely be on the finance committee as well. But I believe that leaving it open is a good option.
I agree.
All right.
So, all right. So we've talked about how the board will be involved, the timing of the board involvement, how many. How about, so after the 3 rounds, and Jen, you do the last interview and the background check, is that for one person or is that for more than one person?
Usually it's only for one person. And again, it's a courtesy, I guess, in education that you don't do the reference checks unless you're pretty much offering the job to that individual. I always require, as part of the reference check, that I have to be able to speak with their current supervisor. And that can sometimes create a little bit of tension, perhaps, when they're leaving the job. And so I usually reserve that until the very last. Um, that is typical, but I'm not 100%. Yeah, I think there would probably be a way around it. Instead, what I would probably do is only call the people that they have letters of reference from. Um, I just don't think that's as good of a process. Because obviously if you're writing a letter, ask somebody to be your letter of reference, they're going to give you a good reference. I think it's more valuable to actually talk to their current supervisor.
So, I wonder if we could consider a process where, when we get to before we get to like one person, right? Say you have a top 3 candidates, calling their references, the references they provided, and just, doing those calls before they move forward. That way, we know, I don't know, that like at least the initial references they provided, they're fine. And maybe those 3 move on to like the final round of interviews. Yeah.
I like that idea. So I like the multiple candidates having one. And after the board gets an opportunity to review however that looks, then the final step is, so Jen, here's a question. Do you usually get permission to contact their current employer?
Once they're the finalists, yes, I always tell them up front that I would need to do that. And I ask them if I actually don't really ask them if they're the finalists. I tell them that I'm going to, that I have to do that as part of them getting the job. If they were to balk at that point, to me, that's potentially a red flag. And so, that's typically my expectation.
Well, I don't know. The only reason is because, so you have a certain expectation, right, when you were interviewing for a job. And without permission, what if, whatever it is, they're not interested in taking the position that you offer them? Let's say it's salary. I'm just throwing one out there because there's typically a range, and it's not what they're interested in, and they wouldn't leave. It might make it complicated for them to stay at their current job if, for whatever reason, the package you're not offering isn't what they want, and you've contacted their employer without permission. So I don't necessarily see that as
Well, it's not without their permission. It's with their knowledge. Let me say, I don't necessarily ask their permission, but I let them know and that I'm going to contact their current supervisor as the final reference check. I typically do that after that 4th interview with me. And it's in that 4th interview that we will start to discuss a compensation package, for the exact reason that you're talking about, is that I wouldn't want to bring them to the board without knowing that the compensation package is what they want, because then it's a waste of your time also. So that's kind of the purpose of that 4th interview, is to sort of suss those details out, to make sure that ultimately when the position is offered, they accept it.
Is that 4th interview usually with the finalist? As in the first 3 interviews are kind of like a round robin. Each one of the 3 interviews subsequently has fewer and fewer participants, so that 4th
Yes.
interview where we're kind of sussing it out.
Yeah,
Really with the final.
I pretty much try to go from, typically I would say 12 to 14, down to about 4 to 6, down to 2 to 3, down to 1. That's kind of the layers.
Jen, I wonder, and the rest of the committee, would it be with this desire to sort of be more involved and see folks before we get to that final interview? What are your thoughts on sort of looking at the top 3, like having Jen present the top 3 candidates to the board, and her sort of outlining the rationale for like I don't know, choosing one of the 3 to go to like the 4th round of interviews.
I think it's workable. That's another step. And to the extent that anybody who might have their present employer called, I think anytime somebody seeking a new position puts their hat in the ring, so to speak, that is ultimately an understanding that that's going to happen. So if there's 1 or 2 of those, or 3, who ultimately would be vetted by the superintendent, including having their present employer called, I think that the applicant would accept that as part of the process. So I think we probably could have 3 brought to us as a matter of procedure.
But,
Yeah.
but would we need to get to that point? Because if the superintendent's bringing 3 potential candidates to the board, and let's say, I'm just throwing this out there, you have a ranking process. You say this is desired 1, 2, 3. And then Jen gets to that point where she's bringing them back in. And let's say number 1 says, sure. And then you call the reference. I would say you call after the board has had an opportunity to look at the 3 candidates. And that way it doesn't put anyone in a precarious situation. And that allows Jen to move forward with the top candidate. And if for whatever reason they balk, as she says, and they're not interested in having their current employer in it, and at any point, if she gets red flags, with that understanding her next stage of the 3 candidate process, I would guess that the candidates come to the board, that we would have a discussion and then rank them, so to speak.
So, I want to be clear. So my suggestion to be presented with 3 candidates wasn't to have them presented in person, but I'd love to see.
Yeah.
You please share if you have other thoughts, but my thinking was, come present these 3, like provide a, executive
share
summary
their
of the
sort of
3 candidates.
application packet or their resume, share the strengths that the committee saw in the person, the pros, cons.
Yes.
I think the board members who participate can add to that conversation and kind of say, these are the 3 people or 2 who are finalists. And this is my recommended, or the committee's recommended number 1.
Yes.
Right. So totally agree, 100%. In no way did I believe that if we were going to actually meet them in person. It was exactly as Jen had outlined.
I think we may have an agreement as far as maybe 2 or more, possibly. I mean, in that the 3, parsing down conferences, finishing with 2 or more, up to the superintendent, that then the board weighs in on. Is that something we should kind of lock in for our next phase of drafting?
Yeah, I would say not more than 3. I would say 2 to 3.
2 to 3.
Because I think that'll just make the discussion easier for the 13-member board we have. So I'd say 2 to 3.
We also have 2 board members who can provide their feedback and impressions as well, along with Jen's recommendation and background of the candidates.
Yeah, I like that idea. I mean, they're the representatives to this process. So,
So I think we've covered pretty much the process, right? Pretty much. Because then once she goes down to 1 candidate, she comes back to us again with that 1 candidate. And at that point, it's almost not necessary because we've already had it. But I think when she narrows it down out of the 3, then she'll have 1. And then she comes back to the board and presents that person.
Yeah, and the board will already be familiar with that candidate. You would have told us before that this is my pick of the 3 or 2.
And why?
And then to Jen's point prior is that candidate, having been approved by the board, will feel more secure in the approval process from the board in their position within the district.
Jen, how do you feel about that?
I'm good with that. I'm just looking at what we actually have drafted up. And so I'm kind of in the yellow section, if you're able to pull that up or look at it. And I'm going to say then that the superintendent shall present 2 to 3 candidates to the Board of Education for consideration. I don't, and
For information.
yeah, and then, I mean, as a board, would you vote at that point on the desired candidate or
No.
just weigh
No,
in?
it's just a presentation. That's how I
Okay.
look at it.
Me too.
Just a quick question. Why wouldn't we vote? And again, not to be contrary, but at this point, if we've, had the superintendent bring the final 2 or 3 prepared to make an endorsement, and we've already had members of our board participating up until this point, right now, we as a full board are being presented with the superintendent's recommendation along with the input of our other 2 members. Might that not be a good time to vote?
It would,
I don't-
except then Jen doesn't have the opportunity to,
Okay.
To
do the
further. Yeah.
right.
Make that
and-
last call. Okay.
Yeah.
and have that final conversation, because if let's say we have 3, and I'm just throwing out a ranking system, and the first candidate somehow Jen sees red flags, whether it's from the package to not wanting, whatever Jen identifies as red flags, and then
Wonderful.
I mean, I've definitely called a reference check at the very last candidate and based on the reference said, okay,
Right.
thank you very much. You are no longer my candidate of choice.
Right.
So to me, that's the most likely thing that could happen is we would get to those 3 finalists and I would call, somebody and they would be like, yeah, no, don't do this. And
Mhm.
I would back out of that.
Then we have
You know,
one more
I
meeting
think-
after that to vote. Okay.
The
Right.
presentation of the 3 people will give us an opportunity to ask Jen questions, right? We'll have the packet, we'll hear from the 2 board reps on the search committee process. And, we could ask her, why did this person seems, I don't know, stronger, like what makes what makes this person more desirable? So I don't know, it'll give us that opportunity to have conversation and to, and provide any suggestions or recommendations
And
about the candidate.
Yeah, I would disagree with voting at that time. I just think that, we trust the superintendent with her expertise and knowing what she really does need in the building in terms of personnel and what their job is and so forth. And we have input all along the way, it seems. So,
Yeah.
So I think there was one of the iterations of the policy where the actual person the board didn't vote, but they were presented to the board as, that last candidate. So in my mind, that would be the end of the step. I would, sort of share the information about the 2 to 3 potential finalists, make the recommendation for the rank order, do the reference checks. If the reference check for number 1 checks out, then I would present them to the board in an official capacity.
and our
I think
role
that
as a
sounds-
board at that point is what?
Is simply to greet them and welcome them to the Amity Regional School District.
Because I hear you, Jen. I'm just wondering, because in a previous meeting, you said it was beneficial for the candidate to get an approval and a vote. Now, maybe it's a different way. So I'm just asking, do you feel that they would find the actual voting approval process to be beneficial?
So I actually think the benefit for the actual vote is more for the superintendent who's making the hiring decision, because it shows the board is supporting that hiring decision. I definitely, I mean, I would say broadly across Connecticut, most of these sort of senior level positions do go to the board for votes. But again, it's kind of that final candidate. So we certainly could at that point have the board vote to approve the appointment of the single finalist.
I like
I
the
think
idea.
we keep the vote.
I think so too. I think we vote to ratify it.
Yeah.
Okay. And I know, Christian, in your analysis, you had questioned sort of that use of the word of inviting the 2 board members.
And I got to tell you, oh, I'm sorry. I interrupted you. I apologize.
Yeah, I was trying to use language that would, like, let's say nobody can come to the interviews for whatever reason. And we can't get board member participation. I didn't want that to stymie the process, so that's why I kind of used a softer piece of language. But if we want to make it that board members, two board members would be required to participate, we certainly can up it. I just didn't want to sort of back us into a corner that maybe we're not anticipating.
Gotcha. In almost a little bit in my defense, or at least an explanation, what I did as a result of our conversations, took notes and remember, and then I looked at our policy, I looked at other policies, and uh, I used AI to help us analyze and kind of amalgamate a bunch of different concepts and review what we're talking about together to kind of give us a summary. And so some of the verbiage, well, actually, I think it's pretty clear, I hope, that what I attached there really wasn't my verbiage, but was rather just, the summary of the AI program that I was using. So if it seemed either overly critical or, kind of semantic, I didn't mean it that way at all. And because I remember reading one of those critiques, compare, contrast. The responding algorithm was like, "Oh, and the superintendent is inviting you, and it's a reversal of power." I did not mean to have that tenor of our conversation and review together at all. That was simply the product of an external brain.
I
So,
think
Oh,
inviting is suitable.
Yeah.
Yep.
it's
Yeah.
fine. No, I understood that because you even said in the email that
Thanks.
AI
Hmm.
was involved.
All right.
Anyway, but I didn't mean
So-
for that to be confrontational, not at all.
Did we
no,
address
that's okay.
everything?
Oh, there's one other category that totally I didn't even think of, but sometimes we need to have an interim, not always, but sometimes
Right.
you need to get somebody to kind of fill the position while we're going through this process, or if in the unfortunate event we had to start over again for whatever reason. So just a thought, what do we do about interim? I don't have a something to present as a final conclusion, but I think we probably should at least address that.
I mean, so from practicality purposes, in most cases, we will hire an interim. But I think typically what we would do, so let's say a principal leaves. What I would normally do is appoint the assistant principal to the principal role as an interim, and then try to find somebody who would really actually serve as the interim for the assistant principal. It's a little bit easier to do it that way because then I have somebody at least who knows what's going on. Um, in some cases, we don't appoint one. Now I'm thinking that, and again, I'm just sort of speculating here. Typically, it would take usually like about 3 months to fill a position, roughly, because all of us have holds on our contracts. So if we were to, if I hire somebody from another district, that district gets to hold them for a certain number of days. It's usually between 30 to 60 days, depending on the position. So I know that what you like, there was a suggestion that the board appoint after a certain amount of time. But I guess I don't know at what point, it's going to be reasonable to do that, only because even no matter how fast we might move through the hiring process, typically there's a hold on that individual for a little bit of time from the other district. Now, in terms of like how schools function, like say a long-term substitute, they're allowed to serve in their position for 60 school days. So that would get us roughly 3 months. So we could approach it in that matter and sort of in that way as well. But those were just kind of my thoughts. It is something that is missing in the policy, and it would be fine to add it. But I do think it's somewhat on a case by case basis, depending on when the vacancy occurs and which position it is.
As a matter of fact, you've essentially been moving up the immediately subordinate person into that position. And as you say, they're going to be the most familiar, assuming there is an immediate subordinate position to move into. And in those instances where there isn't, it sounds like you've been more than able to, if I say make do, I mean to actually have there be no interruption in the educational process. So um, it sounds like what we have in place has been working, but it's just a matter of would it help to have even a mention of what we do in an interim situation and defer the if you want to call it authority to the superintendent to act
To
in the
fill
best
that.
manner.
So Chris, are you just saying you just want some language in there about it, that with the process?
Or not. We could decide to just leave
Hmm.
it out and allow it to kind of continue ad hoc the way it has been. There hasn't been a problem that I'm aware of or heard of. It was just one, it was the last category of hiring that kind of occurred to me that we didn't have in the policy. I don't know that it's fatal without it at all.
So,
I don't fatal without it, but if we're writing the policy, I think maybe we should be thorough and just touch it, just put it in there if there's, so that if there's any questions about,
With the superintendent's discretion, yeah.
right, and that's fine, just the way that it's written, just as long as we address it in the policy. I would feel comfortable with that. Any thoughts from anyone else?
so Jen and Christian is, because I was thinking, okay, if the person, the top ranked candidate said no or something didn't work out with their reference, Jen would just go to the second person. Like, presumably, like there are three people that are like really the three people that rise to the top are really, great. Yes, she might be able to pick one because whatever reason. But wouldn't we just go? I don't know. Don't you just go to like your second top choice? In that case, I see these as two different things, right? So if a principal decides to like resign tomorrow, like different process, you have a process in place to handle that. But with this hiring, I would presume that since we had like three top candidates, you would move on to the next one and then do that reference check. So I don't know.
Usually, there are going to be some positions, particularly school business managers, that there just are not a lot of candidates out there. And there are definitely times when I have said, you know what, they're just I can't live with that second person. And I would go back to the drawing board.
Okay.
But
Okay.
I'd say that's less frequent, and I can pretty much I know which positions. It's going to be business manager and it's going to be pupil personnel directors. Those are the two that,
Okay.
it's hard to find those individuals.
Okay.
Right.
So
So
for
Carol, I
the,
saw that as a separate issue completely. It's just more of a, just clarifying what happens with interim, with the understanding that it could extend if Jen can't find any other positions.
Yeah.
And has to go back to the drawing board. We say, oh, as a board, we come back and say, yes, of course, yes, you can't find anyone. And we extend it for an additional, whatever, 90 days, whatever the board sees fit.
so we leave
And
to,
Jen has the discretion to appoint someone in the interim until we are able to go through the process again.
so we delegate or we allow or in the policy, we give the superintendent the authority to have the most appropriate interim appointed while we're engaged in the hiring process.
Yeah, so like just that language alone is fine, I think.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, agreed.
Wow, I think.
All right. Anything else on 2151? Great. We got through one.
So I guess my question for you all is, do you want me to make the edits that we've discussed and have it come back again to policy before moving it on to the board?
Yes, I think we should see it again in its
Okay.
entirety.
Final look, see, and then
Yep.
send them a good finished product. Cool.
Okay.
All right. We have about 6 minutes.
Oh,
The next-
dear.
The next policy 5145, search and seizure. I'll pause there. Jen, do you want to summarize sort of did we get to this one last month?
We just started to hit on it.
Okay.
And yeah, we had barely skimmed the surface, but we had started to talk about it. And and again, I think there were some questions, and now I'm sort of losing track because it's been almost a year now when the questions came up. But there were questions just around language in it. And I'm looking at the red line that we actually have. Those were so we had the board's attorney review this, and the red lines were the additions that she had recommended to just kind of shore the policy up. Yes, so that's sort of where I remember it leaving off. So I think if I remember correctly, we had an old one, then we used essentially Cade's language as the new one, and then we updated it after the attorney took a look at it.
So, I mean, based on the information that Christian shared, it seems like much of what's highlighted in red violates students' constitutional rights. So it seems to be like the information we got and like the additional content that we got from the attorneys, they seem to be at odds.
And rather than, and we certainly can, do our, legal analysis and ask for more explanation from counsel. And I'll mind my role as a lay board person in that regard. But we can also, regardless of what the Constitution might even allow, we can still come up with our own policy that might even obviate the need to delve into the constitutionality of these close calls. For instance, there could be a question as to when you actually search somebody's car or how, or when you search their backpack or how, or when you search their cell phone or how. And if we err on the side of, I'll call it more conservative, where we don't come close to what the constitutional limit might be, but we come a little step closer towards not pushing the search, we might not even have to have that second legal review. So I think as a board, we were really looking hard and discussing a couple narrow issues, like electronic devices, clothing, body searches, hair searches, whereas a lot of the other policy, I think, might be consistent with our pre-existing policy and with other policies already in place. I mean, I don't want to try to reverse engineer a discussion. I know we only have a couple of minutes left, but maybe for future, should we kind of maybe focus on the ones that we're really grappling with and then kind of work our way back out toward the more general ones?
Sounds like a good plan to me. Do you want to put out what we're grappling with?
Things that are top of my mind, maybe top four would be, to the extent of how if and how we can actually make physical contact with another student's body, external clothes or hair. Another category would be parental notification. Is it something that we should do when we can, or is it something that should be more of a prerequisite? Another would be the searching of personal electronic devices, including cell phones, USB devices. Should that be something that a school should be able to do, or is that something that we'd be more comfortable deferring to law enforcement if the school has enough of a concern that there might be something problematic in those private property? And the last one of the four would be the cars, where the student gives consent because they want a great parking spot or for whatever reason. What do we do when we run into the student that says, "I'm not opening the car for you"? Those are just my thoughts, and I'm sure we may have more.
So I can do the contact with student one really easily. We don't have contact with students typically when we search. We don't touch them. So you can just add that language or codify that however you need to, because we do not, to the extent that we can. I mean, the only time I ever remember doing that is if I had to kind of peer into a pocket, but it's typically the kid is opening the pocket for me and I'm just kind of peeking in. But we don't touch kids when we search them.
So maybe we could put that language in there just somehow, just for clarity.
Physical contact.
There is no physical contact.
Okay.
And give one more that you said car search? What was the thing about the car search?
Oh, yeah, the electronic device and car search. Car search is where, the kids, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, they'll sign a document saying they read the school policy and regulations. And I think they even sign the document stipulating to all reasonable searches of their motor vehicle, which makes all the sense in the world. But what happens when a school administrator wants to search the individual's car for whatever reason and the consent to search is revoked? Do we need to recognize that situation or not?
So,
No
so
property.
if there's a need to search a car and the student says you're not going to my car, Jen, what do we do?
So we'll do well, I guess it depends on the circumstance, but we would typically at that point have contacted the parent and said, your child's refusing us to allow them, just let us search their car. These are the reasons why we think we need to search their car, and see if we can't get the parent to actually agree and support that decision. I guess depending on what is in the car, we could at some point involve law enforcement. They're usually not going to get a warrant for most of the things we're searching for. They don't really care that kids have vapes and stuff like that. But if there was a weapon and a kid was refusing, then we may, we would, that to me would be a situation where we would try to involve law enforcement. Again, the challenge is that law enforcement has a much higher threshold to conduct a search than we do. So a lot of times the information that we're acting on does not meet the criteria that law enforcement would need even to get a search warrant. So it would have to be really, really either egregious concerns or some kind of significantly credible information. And honestly, if we had that level of information, we may not even initiate the search. We may just turn it over to law enforcement right from the outset.
So maybe we could put some language in there. We may request to search a car. If it's refused, the parents would be called. If parents are not willing, depending on, the need of the search, whether up to the discretion of superintendent if the law officer is called, something like that. Does that make sense?
Well, you
I mean,
have to have grounds to call law
Well,
enforcement.
Well,
Do-
she just said that. Just said that
I mean,
that
do we
there would
just-
be certain things that she would call for.
But
Right.
then in that case, she wouldn't even search. She would just call them. They wouldn't even, the school
Right.
wouldn't even.
But she would know if it was necessary to call them or just, there might be something where it's just suspicious and they say no and the parents say no and then that's a done deal.
So
I-
I just,
at the time.
I don't-
I'm sorry.
not to
Dr.
interrupt
Byers.
everyone, but we're
Yeah.
at 5:52.
Right. I just want to be,
So I just want to be
This sounds like-
mindful of time and
have a longer conversation when you get to personal property. And I think because, just as Jen said, she wanted to get our next meeting set up.
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you everyone I'm sorry to interrupt you, Christian. I
Well, no,
just
it's
wanted
okay.
to make sure
I appreciate it.
please
So there's a
stop.
different link for the board meeting. So you're going to exit this one and click on a new link, and I will have that up and running in a couple of minutes.
All right.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Um,
Bye.